My brother-in-law spit in my face at the hospital entrance, called me a worthless orphan playing doctor, ripped my badge off my neck, and had security escort me out like I was a trespasser. My own sister stood 10 feet away, watching, arms crossed, and said nothing. Not a word, not a flinch. But 48 hours later, that same man was on his knees in the surgical wing, begging me to save his son's life. And my sister? She couldn't even look me in the eye. What happens when the person who's supposed to love you the most lets someone destroy you in public? What happens when the one they threw away turns out to be the only one who can save them? And when the truth finally walks into the room, who's left standing? It was 6:47 on a Monday morning when I pulled into the parking garage of St. Marin Regional Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. The air was thick with that late summer humidity that clings to your skin before the sun even rises. I had my coffee in one hand, surgical portfolio in the other, and I was wearing civilian clothes jeans, a white blouse, sneakers. I wasn't scheduled for a procedure that day. I was only stopping by to review pre-op imaging for a pediatric case later in the week. A little boy, 7 years old, born with a congenital defect in his aortic valve. The kind of case that keeps you up at night because one wrong cut, and you lose someone who hasn't even had a chance to live yet. I saw him before he saw me. Derek Calloway, my sister's husband, chief of hospital administration, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a room with his voice before his body even entered it. He was standing at the main entrance talking to 2 security guards, gesturing the way he always did, big, performative, like every word he said deserved a spotlight. I didn't change direction. I wasn't looking for trouble. Honestly, I was too tired for it. I'd been up since 4 reviewing scans, and the last thing I needed was Derek and whatever mood he woke up in. But then he turned, and his expression shifted like a switch had been flipped. "Hey." His voice cut through the quiet morning air like a blade dragged across tile. "Where do you think you're going?" I barely slowed down. "Good morning, Derek." He stepped in front of me, blocking the entrance. "Not today. You're not walking in here like you own the place." I stopped. Not out of fear. Calculation. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." His voice dropped low. "Worthless orphan playing doctor. That's all you are. That's all you've ever been." Before I could respond, he grabbed the lanyard around my neck and yanked. The clip snapped. My badge clattered to the pavement. Then he did something I will never forget as long as I live. He leaned forward and spit. Right on my cheek. I felt the warmth of it slide down my jaw. My coffee hit the ground. Brown liquid pooled around my sneakers like spilled evidence. "Get her out of here," he said to the guards without looking back. "She's not authorized to be on premises today." One of the guards, young, maybe 23, looked at me with something between pity and confusion. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave." I didn't scream, didn't swing, didn't beg. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and looked past Derek, past the guards, past the glass doors of the hospital where I had performed over 300 successful surgeries. And there she was, my sister, Corinne, standing just inside the lobby, watching through the glass, arms crossed, face blank. She saw everything. The spit, the badge, the humiliation. She blinked once, turned around, and walked toward the elevators. That burned worse than anything Derek had done. Because it wasn't that my sister hadn't seen. It was that she had. And she chose to walk away. The guards walked me to my car like I was a threat. One of them muttered sorry under his breath. I didn't respond. I just sat behind the wheel, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed gone." I didn't reply. I turned the key, pulled out of the garage, and drove. But I wasn't running. I was remembering. 6 weeks earlier, things had already started shifting beneath the surface. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The hospital had thrown its annual fundraising gala at the Ballantine Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, string quartet, waitstaff gliding through the room with champagne flutes on silver trays. The whole thing dripped with money and performance. Derek stood at the podium that night, commander-in-chief of the donor room, and now, he announced, flashing that polished smile, "I'd like to recognize the leadership team that makes St. Marin the institution it is." Names were called. Department heads stood. Applause echoed. Dr. Graham for oncology, Dr. Fan for neurology, Dr. Becker for orthopedics. Each one rose, nodded, sat back down like clockwork. My name was never called. I was the lead pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon. I had closed a VSD on a premature infant 3 weeks earlier, a case the hospital's own newsletter had called a landmark achievement in neonatal care. But that night, in that room, I didn't exist. I sat at table 11, near the kitchen entrance, between a pharmaceutical rep and an empty chair. Nobody came over. Nobody asked why I wasn't on the list. Corinne sat at the head table next to Derek, smiling, clapping, leaning into his arm like they were posing for a portrait. After the speeches, I found her near the dessert station. "You didn't think to mention my name?" I asked, quietly. Not angry, just tired. She barely looked at me. "It wasn't my list, Naomi. Talk to Derek. He's your husband." "Exactly," she said, "which is why I'm not getting in the middle of whatever this is between you two. Whatever this is, like it was a misunderstanding, like I was being dramatic." She picked up a plate of mini tarts and walked back to the head table without another word. I stood there for a moment, holding my wine glass, watching the room celebrate everyone except me. Then I set the glass down on the nearest table and left. No scene, no tears, just the click of my heels on marble and the heavy silence of a woman who'd learned to leave before she broke. That night when I got home, I didn't eat, didn't change. I walked straight to the small desk in the corner of my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a wooden box my grandmother had given me the day I got accepted to medical school. She'd been a nurse for 41 years in rural Georgia, never made more than $30,000 a year. But she saved every dime to help put me through school after my parents died. Inside the box was a folded note. Her handwriting, shaky but deliberate. "They'll try to make you small. Don't let them. The world needs your hands steady." She passed 2 years before I finished my residency. Never saw me operate. Never saw me save a life. But her voice lived in that note, and that night, it was enough to keep me from unraveling. I pressed the note to my chest and whispered to the dark room, "I'm still steady, Grandma." 3 weeks before the incident at the hospital entrance, something else happened. Something I nearly missed. I was reviewing patient files late one evening, well past 9, when I noticed a discrepancy in the surgical scheduling system. A case I'd been assigned, a complex repair on a 12-year-old girl with tetralogy of Fallot, had been reassigned to Dr. Marcus Webb. No notification, no explanation, just a quiet switch in the system, time-stamped at 11:43 p.m. the previous Friday. I pulled up the audit trail. The change had been authorized by the admin office, Derek's office. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I started digging. Over the next 2 weeks, I found 4 more cases that had been rerouted away from me. All high visibility, all the kind of surgeries that build a surgeon's reputation, that get written up in journals, that lead to department chair nominations. Every single one had been reassigned to Dr. Webb, a competent surgeon but one who'd never published a paper and had twice been flagged for post-op complication rates above the department average. I printed every audit trail, every timestamp, every authorization code. I stored them in a folder, no label, just a red dot sticker on the corner, and locked it in my personal safe at home, the same safe where I kept my grandmother's box. Then, 11 days before Derek spit in my face, I received a call from Dr. Angela Price, the hospital's chief of medical staff. Angela was old school, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who'd earned her title by being twice as good and half as loud as everyone else in the room. "Naomi," she said, and I could hear the weight in her voice. "I'm calling as a courtesy. There's been a formal complaint filed against you with the medical board." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complaint?" "Negligence, emotional instability, allegations that you've been cutting corners on pre-op evaluations. That's absurd. I've never—" "I know," she said quietly. "But it's filed, and it's signed by someone in administration." She didn't need to say the name. I already knew. "Angela, I have documentation that—" "Don't tell me over the phone," she interrupted. "And don't confront anyone. Not Yehin the diff. What I think is happening is actually happening. You need to be smarter than they expect you to be." I sat in silence for a long time after she hung up. Then I opened my laptop and forwarded every document I had, every audit trail, every reassignment log, every timestamp to an encrypted backup I'd created months ago. Just in case had arrived. A week before the confrontation, something unexpected happened. I was sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad I didn't want, when someone slid into the seat across from me. It was Marcus Webb, the surgeon who'd been receiving all my reassigned cases. He looked uncomfortable, eyes darting. hands wrapped around a coffee cup he wasn't drinking. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not react." I set my fork down. "Go ahead." "Those cases I've been getting, the phalate repair, the mitral valve replacement, the neonatal case from last month, I didn't request any of them. They showed up on my schedule. I assumed it was routine rotation. It wasn't." He swallowed hard. "I know that now. Derek called me into his office last week, told me I was being positioned for growth, said the board was watching, that if I played along, there'd be a department chair recommendation by December." Played along with what? Marcus looked at me like a man choosing between safety and conscience. "He said you were becoming a liability, that your work was slipping, that they needed to transition you out quietly." The cafeteria noise faded. Everything faded. "He's building a case against you, Naomi. Not a medical one, an administrative one. And your sister, she's signing off on everything." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, I nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." He stood up, hesitated, then said, "For what it's worth, you're the best surgeon in this building. Everyone knows it. Even him." He walked away. I sat there for another 20 minutes, staring at the wall, letting the full weight of it settle. My sister, not just complicit, co-signing my destruction. That night, I went home and added Marcus's account to my file. Written in my own hand, dated, detailed. Then I called Dr. Price and said 3 words. "I'm ready." "When?" She said, "Let them make the next move. Then we make ours." 2 days later, Derek spit in my face. Now, sitting in my car in the parking garage after being escorted out, I understood the full picture. The spit wasn't rage, it was strategy. He wanted me to react, to scream, to swing, to give him the scene he needed to justify everything he'd been building behind my back. A surgeon who loses control in public is a surgeon who doesn't belong near a scalpel. But I didn't give him that. I gave him silence. And silence, when wielded by someone with evidence, is the most dangerous thing in the world. I drove home, showered, changed into clean clothes, and called Dr. Price. "It happened," I said. "I heard," she replied. "Security cameras caught everything. Naomi, the footage is already circulating among the senior medical staff." "Good. There's something else," she said. "The board is calling an emergency review session. Not about you, about him." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "One more thing," Angela added. "His son, Caleb, the 7-year-old on your surgical roster, the aortic valve case, what about him? The case is still yours. Legally, administratively, ethically, no one else in this region is qualified to perform that procedure. Webb certainly isn't." I closed my eyes. Caleb Calloway, 7 years old, born with a defective aortic valve that was slowly failing. The surgery was scheduled for Wednesday, 2 days away, and his father had just spit in the face of the only person who could save him. "I know what you're thinking," Angela said. "I'm thinking about a 7-year-old boy who didn't choose his father." Exactly. The next 48 hours moved like a slow-burning fuse. The board convened. Security footage was reviewed. Derek's complaint against me was pulled apart, and when they cross-referenced his allegations with my actual surgical record 0 malpractice claims, a 97.6% success rate, 3 published papers in the last 2 years, the whole thing collapsed like wet paper. Then came the audit trails I'd saved, the reassigned cases, the timestamps, Marcus Webb's voluntary statement, submitted in writing, detailing how Derek had manipulated the scheduling system to systematically remove me from high-profile surgeries. Dr. Price presented it all in a closed session. By Tuesday evening, Derek Calloway had been suspended from his administrative position, pending a full investigation by the hospital's ethics board and the State Medical Oversight Commission, and then Wednesday morning arrived. I was in the pre-op briefing room at 5:30 a.m., reviewing Caleb's scans one last time. His little heart was struggling. The valve was deteriorating faster than projected. We couldn't wait another week, couldn't transfer him, couldn't stall. It was now or possibly never. At 6:15, my assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Price wants to see you. There's a situation in the lobby." I walked out and saw them before they saw me. Derek, standing near the reception desk, still wearing yesterday's clothes, wrinkled, unshaven, stripped of everything that had once made him look powerful. Corinne stood behind him, mascara smeared, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. When Derek saw me, his face crumbled. Not the smirk, not the performance, something raw and real and desperate. Naomi. His voice cracked. Please. I stopped walking. I didn't speak. Caleb, they told me, you're the only one who can. He couldn't finish the sentence. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking. This was a man who had spent years building a kingdom out of control, and now he stood in the lobby of his own hospital with nothing left. I know what I did, he whispered. I know what I said. I know what I said. He choked on the words. Please don't let my son pay for what I did to you. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Corinne. She was crying now, silently, tears running down her cheeks, but she couldn't bring herself to look at me. Her eyes stayed on the floor, and I could see it in the way her shoulders shook. She knew. She'd always known. Corinne, I said. She flinched at the sound of her own name. Look at me. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw my sister. Not Derek's wife. Not the woman who'd chosen comfort over loyalty. Just my sister, terrified and broken and standing in the wreckage of every choice she'd made. I'm going to save your son, I said. Not because either of you deserve it, but because Caleb does. And because I took an oath that means more to me than anything you've ever taken from me. Derek's knees buckled. He caught himself on the reception counter. Corinne covered her mouth with both hands. I turned and walked toward the surgical wing without looking back. The surgery lasted 6 hours and 43 minutes. I opened that little boy's chest and held his heart in my hands, literally held it, while my team worked to repair what nature had built wrong. There were moments when his pressure dropped and the monitors screamed and every person in that room held their breath. But my hands didn't shake. They never do. At 1:17 p.m., I closed the last suture. Caleb's heart began to beat with the steady, strong rhythm of a boy who was going to grow up, go to school, fall in love, and live a life his father nearly destroyed the one person capable of giving him. When I stepped out of the OR, still in my surgical gown, I saw Angela Price waiting in the corridor. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. The kind of nod that carries more weight than any standing ovation. Down the hall, through the glass window of the waiting room, I could see Derek and Corinne. He was sitting with his head in his hands. She was staring at the ceiling. When the nurse went in to tell them Caleb was stable, Derek broke down completely. Shoulders heaving, face buried in his palms. I didn't go in. That room wasn't mine. Instead, I walked to the stairwell, sat on the cold concrete step, and cried. Not for Derek, not for Corinne, not even for myself. I cried for my grandmother, who never got to see what these hands could do. I cried for every time I'd been made to feel like I was too much or not enough. And I cried because saving a life, even the life connected to someone who tried to destroy yours, is the most exhausting and beautiful thing a human being can do. The following week, the ethics board delivered its findings. Derek Calloway was permanently removed from his administrative position and barred from holding any leadership role in a medical institution in the state of North Carolina. The case reassignments were reversed. My complaint record was cleared, and a formal apology was issued not from Derek, but from the institution that had allowed him to operate unchecked for years. 2 weeks later, I was offered the position of Chief of Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery. I accepted. On the day of the announcement, I found an envelope on my desk. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. Naomi, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. I stood there and watched while someone who was supposed to be my partner tore apart someone who was supposed to be my family. I chose comfort over you. I chose silence over truth. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. You saved my son. You saved him when you had every reason in the world not to. I don't know how to repay that. I don't know if I can. But I want you to know I see you now. I should have seen you all along. Corinne. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, walked to my desk, and placed it inside my grandmother's wooden box, next to the note that read, They'll try to make you small. Don't let them. 2 voices. 2 women who shaped me. One who believed in me before I had proof, and one who finally saw the proof and couldn't look away anymore. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because some things don't need a response. They just need to be witnessed. That Saturday, I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. A small plot in Decatur, Georgia, shaded by a magnolia tree she'd planted herself 30 years ago. I sat on the grass beside her headstone, leaned my back against the warm stone, and talked to her the way I used to when I was a kid. I held a little boy's heart today, Grandma, I whispered, and my hands were steady, just like you said. The wind moved through the magnolia leaves, slow and soft, and for a moment, I swear I heard her voice. Not words, just warmth, just presence, just enough. A month later, I stood at the podium of the American Pediatric Surgical Association's annual conference in Chicago. 300 surgeons in the audience, cameras rolling. The room was silent. I didn't talk about Derek. Didn't mention the spit, the badge, the security escort, the erasure. I talked about hands. About what it means to hold someone's life in your palms and choose, every single time, to fight for them even when the world has given you every reason to let go. Integrity, I said, leaning into the microphone, isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when someone who hurt you needs you most. And you show up anyway. The room was quiet for a beat. Then, slowly, applause. Afterward, a young resident approached me. She was maybe 26, dark circles under her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that only comes from first-year residency. Dr. Price, I mean. Dr. Voss? She corrected herself, flustered. I just wanted to say, I almost quit last month. I felt invisible. Like no matter how hard I worked, nobody saw me. I looked at her the way my grandmother once looked at me. They don't have to see you, I said. You just have to keep showing up until the work speaks so loud they can't pretend they're deaf anymore. She smiled. Small, tired, but real. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window looking out over the Chicago skyline. The city lights blinked like 1,000 quiet witnesses. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I kept in my favorites, my grandmother, standing in front of the hospital where she'd spent her entire career, wearing scrubs 2 sizes too big, grinning like she owned the world. I set the phone down, poured a glass of water, and wrote one line in my journal. He called me a worthless orphan, but these orphan hands just saved his son. I closed the book and slid it into my bag. Then I whispered something into the quiet room. Not for anyone else, just for me. Some people try to break you by taking away your name, but they forget your hands remember who you are, even when the world pretends to forget. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to stand beside you but chose to stand aside. My story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when you refuse to become the person they tried to make you. When you choose healing over hatred. When you save the child of the man who tried to destroy you not because he earned it, but because you did. Have you ever been let down by someone in your own family when it mattered most? Have you ever had to choose between your pain and someone else's need? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to DR Revenge Story for more powerful stories just like this one.